banks of the Colorado River in Lake Mead to the homes and businesses in Southern Nevada, welcome to Water Smarts, the podcast pumping from the heart of Las Vegas, where we engage with the experts who keep the water flowing throughout Southern Nevada. I'm Bronson Mack.
And I'm Zuelke. From how we treat it, deliver it, use it, protect it, and conserve it, the Water Smarts podcast is all about water in Southern Nevada. We hope to make you a little smarter about the one thing that keeps us all connected: water.
Hey, Crystal, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Bronson. I'm literally just seeing in my email the latest update on our water use numbers.
Oh, yes.
And we're on track. We're doing good as a community. We're still down compared to the last 3 years. This is the 3-year average that we do, and we put these numbers on our website for everybody to see if they're interested at snwa.com. So I'm interested and excited to kind of talk today to our guest on the podcast, because we're going to see how our conservation efforts relate to our groundwater supply and how that benefits our groundwater.
Yeah, and groundwater is one of those things, right? Kind of out of sight, out of mind. We certainly know that many people here in Southern Nevada are very aware of our groundwater system because they utilize that. They are private well owners. They have their own wells. They are pumping that water for their own domestic or home use purposes. And it's going to be a great conversation to learn a little bit more about how our groundwater system really does help to diversify our water resources as a community. Gives us another water supply, also gives us a place where we can bank water. And that's why today we have Water Resource Manager Andrew Burns joining us to talk about groundwater, how we use it to supplement our Colorado River water supplies, and why groundwater is such an important part of our community's water resources. Andrew, thank you for joining us here on the Water Smarts podcast.
Well, thanks, Bronson. I'm happy to be here. Good morning, Crystal.
Andrew, obviously, a lot of people here in Southern Nevada, they've got a lot of information about drinking water. I mean, I think we do a good job getting our information about our drinking water supply, about the Colorado River, and about Lake Mead. So there's a high awareness that we have in our community for Lake Mead's water levels, some of the challenges that we've seen with the drought and the flows of the Colorado River over the past 2 decades. But, not a lot of people are really aware of groundwater and how important groundwater is to our overall water resource portfolio. And even that Las Vegas actually exists because of groundwater. Can you provide our listeners with kind of a quick history about the implications and impacts of groundwater on the Las Vegas Valley?
Back in history, groundwater occurred in the form of spring discharge, right? And that spring discharge provided stops along routes for settlers to water their horses, to get water supply, but it also supplied water and sustenance for the indigenous folks, the Paiutes that lived here before. So spring discharge in Las Vegas Valley was critical. It provided a water supply. Early settlers in late 1800s, let's say, the Mormon settlers came and they tried to put that water to use, farming, and it didn't work out so well for that purpose. In the early 1900s, then the Las Vegas Land and Water Company came and bought some ranches for the purposes of supporting railroad operations. That was really the start of development of that resource in Las Vegas Valley. And they had a tract of land. If your listeners know where Main Street Station is downtown, east of there is this tract of land that water company supported to provide water and support operations for the railroad. So that was the start of development. In that time frame, they weren't too keen on building out their distribution system beyond the tracts of lands that they owned. And so some entrepreneurs started drilling wells. First well, I think, was drilled in 1907. And when they drilled that well, they found their artesian conditions, free-flowing water from the well. So that was sort of the start of groundwater development by our predecessor, the Las Vegas Land and Water Company, a predecessor to the Las Vegas Valley Water District. And then the community was dependent upon groundwater for decades thereafter. Wells, springs sustained the valley for, the whole entire period up until Colorado River water was imported in 1971 from the newly constructed Southern Nevada water system.
It's hard to imagine sometimes thinking about water free-flowing here in the middle of the desert, but it did, and you can see much of that water history at the exhibits and historic sites at the Springs Preserve, which we call the birthplace of Las Vegas. Boomtown 1905 has a recreated town site and some of the original railroad worker cottages that were relocated from downtown Las Vegas. If you hike along the trails, you can see some of the remnants of the original water system, like the iconic redwood water well derricks and the little spring house. And some of the original redwood water pipes are actually on display in the Waterworks Museum. But today, as you mentioned, or at least since 1971, we rely mainly on Colorado River water for our homes and businesses. So even though Colorado River water comprises 90% of our drinking water supply, groundwater remains an important water resource, as you mentioned. Andrew, can you explain how we still use groundwater here in the Valley today?
It's still a critical component of our water resource supply. About 10% of our total supply is groundwater. It's extracted by production wells owned by the Las Vegas Valley Water District and some wells owned by the city of North Las Vegas. And for that community and those distribution systems, that water's pumped from the aquifer. The springs are dry now. There was a lot of overpumping early in the time frame between when wells were drilled in the 1940s up to 1970s. The state engineer had issued permits, so the basin's over-allocated and over-pumped, and water levels declined precipitously, and the springs dried up. So it's a management effort for us to make sure that we're managing the resources that we rely upon, the 10% that we rely upon. That's the municipalities. There's domestic well owners, there's quasi-municipal water rights that are in the valley as well. So they rely on groundwater for their small communities or small water systems. So groundwater is still a very big component of this community's water supply. And it's an important one for the water district and the water authority, because if we didn't have that supply, we would require that equal amount of water from the Colorado River, which of course we all know is in a tenuous situation with persistent drought conditions and such. So it's really a critical supply. It's a permanent supply. Right. So we view this as a permanent supply that's available to us on a perennial basis. So each year we have this volume of water that we can produce from the aquifer, and that makes that 10%.
So from what I understand, Andrew, the Water Authority's Water Resource Plan considers groundwater as an important part of its resource portfolio. In the past, the Water Authority has pumped Colorado River water into the groundwater aquifer to recharge it and shore up the aquifer. Can you talk about these efforts and how they've supported our water resources when it comes to the big picture?
Sure. Just taking a step back, when I was talking about the overallocation and overpumping and the drawdown that was observed in the aquifer, this is water levels that were declining, over 100 feet in time before Colorado River was imported. And when Colorado River came in, it provided some relief, but it still didn't stabilize the aquifer. After the Water Authority was formed, there is what we call Colorado River unused apportionment. So it's a volume of water that's not used, but we're allocated as part of the law of the river. And so what we were able to do is construct injection wells to put that water in a groundwater bank, what we call the Southern Nevada Water Bank. And so we take treated Colorado River water from our treatment plant, and it's pushed over to the Water District wells and injected into the principal aquifer underlying Las Vegas Valley. And that created this Southern Nevada Water Bank, which we have now as one of our important temporary water resources in our water resource plan. We can rely upon that in emergency situations. Let's say a pumping station goes down and we have a few wells, we can draw on that bank for those purposes. It's really a temporary resource in that it's an exhaustible supply, and it's meant to bridge from our permanent resources to when we would bring future resources on should demands require that. The injection of that water did two things. It created that bank and that supply that's available to us in the future, but it also allowed the aquifer to recover. That volume of water injected into the ground, water levels recovered quite a bit. And so that's been two net positives for the community there.
Yeah, and that's really part of some of the groundwater management activities that the Southern Nevada Water Authority has done, and your group specifically has done, Andrew. Just as you indicated, overallocation of the groundwater here in Southern Nevada in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, that overallocation drew down the aquifer, basically reducing the amount of water that was in the aquifer. And then to counter that, when Colorado River water was brought into the valley in 1971, we've also been able to, since that time, take unused Colorado River water and inject it into that aquifer, help to replenish that aquifer, bring those water levels back up to sustainable levels, while also creating a reserve water supply for our future needs. And if I understand correctly, we've got more than a year's worth of water supply stored in the aquifer beneath our feet. And then we've got another 10 to 12 years worth of water at our current water rates stored in other water banks in Arizona and in California, as well as in Lake Mead. And you talked a little bit about water rights and they're kind of like owning a share, if you will, of groundwater. So groundwater rights are kind of like having an ownership and a share of that water, sort of like, I guess if you invest in the stock market and you feel like you've got some ownership of part of a company. But those water rights really do determine how much water can be used by those water right holders. So there's limits on how much water they can use. Can you just explain for our listeners a little bit about how groundwater is actually monitored to make sure that as we replenish that aquifer and keep those water levels up, how do we know those water levels aren't declining? What goes on for monitoring the groundwater system? Because we can't see that water, so I assume you've got some tools and techniques to do that.
That's right, Bronson. And some of the tools are imposed by our permit terms that are issued by the state engineer who administers the groundwater. For example, a water right, it's a real property, right? So as you said, you could buy or sell water right. But with that comes the understanding that it permits you to use what's considered a state resource. So it has permit terms. You can use this water if you put it to beneficial use. If you are in adherence to the permit terms, which will specify the rate at which you can extract that groundwater, the volume you can extract within a year. So there's various permit terms. Now, for someone like a big water right owner like Las Vegas Valley Water District, we institute and develop with the state monitoring programs so we can understand how the aquifer responds when we extract water, when we produce that water from a well or a series of wells or well fields. And what's critical there is developing an understanding of how water levels will decline when you pump a certain volume of water and how those effects might propagate over to another water right owner. Let's say it's a senior water right or a domestic well owner. By pumping this well, how is that going to impact these other right owners? And so that monitoring helps inform management of that resource. And, the water district has about 62 wells that we maintain and operate that are permitted so we can extract water throughout the valley at those locations. We use the monitoring data that's collected by my team, but also other teams in the water district. We have our lab team that collects water quality samples. We have operational data that's collected. So all this information helps us understand how this system behaves to certain stresses, whether it's a pumping stress or whether it's drought conditions. We monitor the hydraulic conditions of the aquifer, but also the water quality because we have requirements under the Safe Drinking Water Act to make sure that the water that we deliver meets those regulations and all the water quality parameters are below the maximum contaminant levels. The monitoring helps ensure we comply with those regulations, and we provide what actually turns out to be a really nice water supply in terms of quality. But this monitoring helps us understand the dynamics of the aquifer system. We have 200 wells in our program that we monitor for groundwater levels. We'll measure groundwater levels. We'll collect water quality samples. All that monitoring is very helpful in informing how we manage the resource.
So another piece of this puzzle is homeowners. Many of the homes that rely on groundwater from residential wells were built in locations that didn't have access to the municipal water supply. But as the valley has developed over time, some of those homes are now a lot closer to the municipal water system. To help those homeowners connect to the municipal water system, the Southern Nevada Water Authority has a grant program that helps pay for a significant portion of the cost to connect. Andrew, why would a homeowner want to consider connecting to the municipal water system, and how can the Water Authority help them do that?
One reason is you would be required to under certain conditions by state regulations. And if the state has issued a determination that your property is close enough to a municipal supply, then your permit would be revoked, and then you would have to hook up to the municipal supply if I think it's within 180 feet. So under that condition, there's reason, right? But there's also voluntary reasons. I mean, there's maintenance of a well. Wells don't last forever. The infrastructure degrades and things have to be replaced, and it's not cheap. Even drilling a new well, if you're able to do that, is very expensive. And I don't know if the current connection charges, what they would be for a typical homeowner or the cost necessarily for drilling a well. I would think they're comparable. And why not take advantage of a program that'll pay 85% of those costs and alleviate or allow you to not have to maintain a well, a pump, and all you have to do is connect to a system. And you pay for the water, but you're not paying the electrical bill either. So there's a lot of benefits in my mind. The program also, if someone's required or decides to hook up to the municipal system, they have a well there that they're not using. The program will pay 100% of the cost to plug and abandon that well. And that's really a very important part of the program that we should underscore is the plug and abandonment of those wells is critical, but there's abandoned wells throughout the valley that are derelict. They're just sort of sitting there. And this program helps fund the plugging and abandonment of those wells for aquifer protection purposes. We don't want a well that's drilled, several hundred feet into the aquifer, providing a pathway for contaminants. So we're pretty keen on that. We don't want contaminants in the aquifer that would migrate to our production wells and into our distribution system. So our monitoring that we talked about earlier is designed to observe any contaminants and track them so we can respond and mitigate those instances where contamination has occurred. This is one way of doing it, is plugging abandoned wells.
What a great program. I mean, not only helping well owners to make that conversion from the private well that maybe failed or that they no longer want to have to maintain, to be able to connect to the municipal water system, to be able to get some funding grant support to do that, as you indicated, paying about 85% of the cost for those connections and to make that transition, that switch from a groundwater well over to the municipal water system. The further benefits that you indicated there about plugging and abandoning wells, I mean, that is huge. Every water user in Southern Nevada benefits from that. If we are protecting the aquifer and keeping it free from contamination, that just maintains that as a reliable water source that we can continue to utilize to meet our water needs. I know most of our well owners here in Southern Nevada are very well versed in this program. You can visit LasVegasGMP.com for more information. That's Las Vegas GMP, Groundwater Management Program.com. And of course, anybody that is in that program or is taking advantage of that program, they do pay a nominal annual fee of $20 a year to be enrolled in that program, to be eligible for that funding. So it really is a very solid program and provides a lot of help to our well owners here in Southern Nevada, but it also benefits the entire community. Am I right with that one, Andrew?
That's right, Bronson. And for just a nominal fee that you mentioned, provides great benefit to well owners that have wells that are either required to hook up to the municipal system or voluntarily would like to do so. And the program is good in that it helps protect the aquifer system itself with this plugging and abandonment. So it's a great program. And we have a workshop every fall where we review the groundwater conditions for the year. We work with well owners that are there, if they're interested, to describe what's happening in the system and how it's behaving and responding to hydrologic conditions and such. So it's an opportunity, and look at the website for when that might occur.
Lots of good information there, keeping communication with well owners, helping even those who aren't well owners to better understand how our groundwater system benefits us here in Southern Nevada as a critical part of our water supply. Andrew Burns with the Southern Nevada Water Authority, thank you so much for joining us today on the Water Smarts Podcast.
Thank you, Bronson. And thank you, Crystal. Have a great day.
Well, Crystal, another great conversation. I love talking about groundwater. It is one of those things that we all know it exists, but it's kind of hard to conceptualize. Like, wait, there's water underground and you can access that and use that for a municipal supply? That seems weird.
Yeah, it's because we don't see it, right? It's kind of like our infrastructure. A lot of our water infrastructure, people don't see it. Like they see power lines and other utilities around town. And yes, I learned a lot today. I don't know a lot about groundwater. So it's really interesting to hear that, whatever we don't use out of our allocation, we're able to use to recharge and put into the groundwater system to continue to build up our bank, which is amazing. And then I was going to ask you a question because one of the things we see a lot in social media comments on our channels are questions or comments from people saying, when we talk about the drought and shortage and, conserving our resources in Lake Mead, people will ask, we know we have water under our feet. There's water down there. Why aren't we using it? And they say we shouldn't worry about Lake Mead because we do have this bank of water. So explain that, Bronson. Like, why can't we just tap into that or use that?
Yeah, and I think that's a fair question. And I think we actually heard a little bit from Andrew that when we did solely tap groundwater back in the early 1900s and into the mid-century, we placed too much demand on the aquifer. That drew down the water level. That then caused wells to go dry. They were no longer deep enough to reach that water level. So the aquifer has, some limits on it, at least from a demand perspective, right? We can't place too much demand on it. On top of that, for municipal water rights, we have access to about 47,000 acre feet of groundwater. We have access to 300,000 acre feet of Colorado River water. Last year, our community consumed about 188,000 acre feet total. So you can see, just based on 47,000 underground and 300,000 acre feet out at Lake Mead, and we used 188, you can see there that our conservation has driven down our demand. It gives us a lot more headroom within our water supply, both our Colorado River and our groundwater. But that groundwater supply, we have a limited amount of water that we have rights to. We do use that water on an annual basis so that we can make sure that we maintain those water rights. Also helps us to reduce the demand of the water that we're pulling out of Lake Mead through the Colorado River. So it really is part of that resource portfolio. And the more water supplies and resources we have to be able to pull from, the higher reliability that you have within your water supply. And this is why we have been working for decades to diversify our water resources. And if you are curious about the diversification of Southern Nevada water resources, just go to our website, snwa.com, and take a look at our water resource plan. It's very reader-friendly. It is very easy to follow along. It's compartmentalized. You can search it. You can search the water rights and the water right portfolios. It's really, really helpful. Go to snwa.com. Look at our water resource plan for more information. And that's it for this episode here on the Water Smarts Podcast. We hope you subscribe, and don't forget to listen next time. And if you like the show, give us a rating. We'll take it. It helps us to reach more Southern Nevadans with this important water message. And if you'd like more information about conservation, water quality, new technologies, and everything that you need to stay water smart, you can find all of that information and resources on our website at snwa.com. That's snwa.com. And we'll see you here next time on Water Smarts.